So we'll go into the introduction slide. Henry, yep. And we're going to talk about the annual sponsors. Great. Thank you, UC Business School, who's been helping with many of the stuff, and AWS for becoming the annual sponsor again and supporting us in a lot of ways. And many of our supporters, including SiteHost, Ridiculous Digital, Integration Works, Crescent Consulting, have been an integral part of Canterbury for a few months and even years, actually, for now. And that's why we invited one of the, one of our supporters, SiteHost, is going to be presenting for today's session and get to understand their own kind of technical knowledge into their journey of the solar powered cloud. So thank you again, annual sponsors and supporters. We're going to go into introduction page, Henry. And great. So we are also having a tech fest. So this usually runs about during the tech week. So last year we ran a pretty 1-week program that was a grand success. So the registrations are now live. Please go and click techfest.nz, and it takes you to a site that you can see everything and be part of it in whatever ways. And we have several sponsorship that has been helping in different days as well. Spark Health for the future of health, and See Tomorrow First for the future of big ideas. And we have Invest Hong Kong for the future of environment and sustainability day, and the information leadership for tech in our business day. So make sure you go and see them and check out them and register for many of the events. So now we are going to introduce Quintin, which is why we are here for, and he's going to talk about the journey to a solar power cloud. And Quintin is the technical director and co-founder of SiteHost, the largest New Zealand-owned hosting company. He comes from a development background and has spent the last 20 years becoming the expert in more technologies than we could have room to list here. He now runs enough infrastructure to ensure that he rarely gets a good night's sleep. And since 2019, he has also led the development of a unique PHP-focused serverless hosting platform. And his most recent conference appearance was at CloudFest 2024. We are keen to hear about what you learned there, Quintin, as well. And he announced the launch of new international hosting brand WebSlice. So when he's not looking after servers, he likes to play football and has recently taken up squash. Thank you so much for being part of it. Quintin, I'm going to hand over the reins to you and take us through the journey with you and Max Jones, who is also from the team.
Thank you, everybody. I'm not au fait with Zoom, so if I get any notifications about letting someone in, just bear with me. Okay, for those who don't know me, my name's Quintin, and I made the mistake of starting a hosting company back in 2004. More recently, we built our own DC in Penrose, Auckland, that we're super proud of. And after we had done that, the natural progression was to, take a look at how we could be more efficient, more carbon neutral, and make sure that we were doing the right thing in terms of how we sourced our power. For anybody who hasn't been out to visit us, this is our site, and we have a nice big site. So this talk is really about how we worked on getting the power onto the site, the solar power onto the site. Basically, I've got 3 areas that I want to go through, and those are the work that we went to get the panels onto the roof and some of the steps that we took to get there, considerations around dimensioning your solar install and how to think about your needs if you are in the, luxurious position of having constant load. And at the end, a couple of slides of how it went, how it's performing, and a bit of Q&A. In essence, this talk is about how to get these solar panels here onto here to power this. So my brother Nathan and I started the business back in 2004. It's now been 20 years. And probably about 8 years ago, we were like, it'd be nice to get some solar panels on the roof. The first thing we realized was that you're not going to put solar panels onto a roof if it's about to be replaced. I'll probably go back to this slide because this is more appropriate here. So we had to wait a bit of time for that to all line up nicely. But at the start of 2021, we decided it was time to replace the roof. And so we got on and got the roof replaced. And the reason I have this slide up here is because even though the engineers outlined 3 buildings there's actually only 2 buildings. And why I'm pointing that out will become a bit more clear later on. But essentially, A and B are one building, and building C is another. But in terms of how the engineer looked at it, they looked at it as three different roofs. Yeah, so we went on the mission of replacing the roof, and it turns out replacing the roof without replacing air conditioning can be quite difficult. So that was a bit of a challenge for us. But ultimately, we achieved the roof replacement without going through replacing all the aircon plant, because if we'd had to replace all the aircon plant, it would have thrown out, well, it would have been expensive for one, but it also would have thrown out the figures in terms of your return on investment for your solar and some of the other broader goals that we had. And I guess you'll see in these diagrams, it's quite, on the screen share, it's quite nice to see. We also consolidated the aircon plant to a couple of locations on the roof as well. So we persisted with getting the roof replaced, and after that, we started engaging with some solar installers. And on the left here, on this slide in the white cap, we have Andrew, and on the right we have Pete. Now, these gentlemen own and run the installation company that we ended up using, and this photo was actually on our roof. And look, Andrew and Pete aren't paying me to say this, but their business, Trilect, is a fantastic company, and they did an amazing job coming out on site and coming up with about 15 different concepts of how we could lay out the panels. I didn't really want to bore you with those details, but on the website, they've got a case study of what we did, and you can go and have a look. Now, in the end, we put 384 solar panels on the roof, and we split those across 2 inverters. And the reason for that is because building A and B are on one ICP, and building C is on another ICP. And an ICP, for those who don't know, is just like a meter. Now, they reckon that we're doing about 190,000 kilowatt hours a year. And I guess we'll talk about at the end how we've gone. And about 24 ton of CO2 offset for this install. So in terms of installs, it's decent size. And yeah, we're really, obviously this information is a couple of years old at this point. We're really happy with it. So the first thing after we got through the sales process and everything else was that we had to get an engineer in to have a look at the roof, just to make sure it was going to be strong enough. And we thought, oh, okay, they'll run some calculations, we'll be fine. This building, should come as no surprise, but has a really good earthquake rating. So we weren't worried about it at all. And I guess that was a bit of a lesson for us, because we found out that this building was built, we already knew, but that it was built in 1985. But what we found out was that it was built in 2 phases. And the bottom part of the building there was actually built towards the end. And a few conversations over a couple of drinks, we surmised that they might have been running a little bit light on budget, because they cut a couple of corners in terms of the purlins and just the general strength of that roof. And so, yeah, we'd been through a whole bunch of different concepts with Trilect and the team. We were ready to go. We had a finalized proposal, final. And then the engineer's report came back and said, oh, shoot, you can only put 40% of the panels on that roof that you wanted to. So then we started, obviously, the natural conversation of, well, what are our options? And we looked at 3 different options. And the first one were some really lightweight solar panels. And given the choice of going with lightweight panels or strengthening the roof, we opted to strengthen the roof. It's probably worth mentioning that these panels are more expensive, but the difference in cost between these panels or strengthening the roof was about cost neutral. And the reason that we went for the roof strengthening option was solar panels ultimately have a shorter lifetime than, say, strengthening the roof. And while that was a little bit more work for some poor installer, we figured that making the investment in the long term, which is a large chunk of what we're about, was going to pay off for us. So yeah, we just decided to just make the investment. Now, that was our case, and yours might be different, but I guess what I want to highlight here is that you might have a roof and it might look all good, and you might get an engineer in and there might be some complications. So if I can save someone a bit of pain, it's always good to get your roof checked early on in the process. It's also worth mentioning that the cost of strengthening the roof to this project was about 15%, 1.5, of the overall install. So it was a significant portion of the cost. The other option we looked at was monkey toe. This is just in the way. I'll see if I can move. Oh, I can't. So, you know, I don't know if anybody's used this or if this is something that you've come across if you're in sort of the roofing or aircon or solar industry. They offer a really good service on paper, and they'll certify and engineer a solution for you. But for us, this ended up being a very, very expensive service, a very, very expensive option. It didn't make any financial sense, so we just moved on. So yeah, it's probably worth mentioning. Focus back, yeah. It's probably worth mentioning that we discovered that we needed to do the strengthening of the roof after we'd actually replaced the roof. And so that ultimately made it a lot more expensive and complicated as well. Like I said, some poor installer had to get into the ceiling cavity and install these purlins. If we'd known a few months earlier, that would have been nice, and we could have done it while the tin was off, and rather than having to come up from underneath, we could have come in from the top. So yeah, that was a big lesson for us in terms of this install. Was even though naturally it makes sense that you would do an install straight after you've done a roof, the two projects are kind of linked, and having some input on both projects from either the solar installers or the engineers would be beneficial in lining those up. And for those nerds out there who want to know what a purlin looks like, that's what it looked like after the fact. So, sorry, the lag here. That's basically all it was to strengthen the roof, and then we were able to load those up as much as we want to. And so after that, we got all the panels on and a few more than we were wanting, and we're pretty happy with it. It looked pretty good. In fact, that's a picture of the panels on there. And so yeah, that was essentially the physical side of getting the gear on the roof. Missing a few photos of them winching it up or actually doing the install, but yeah, in essence, that was reasonably straightforward. So the next piece I want to talk about is how the math works in terms of solar, because at the end of the day, if the math doesn't make sense, you're probably not going to do it. And so the really important thing for us in generating our own power is that, we're using all of the power on site. And so just understanding for power that we would say export or, consume in other ways, here's a diagram from your average electricity bill from the Electricity Authority. And this is sort of what it looks like. And you'll see there that generation is about 32%. So if we were exporting our solar generated power to the grid, we'd only be getting about 1/3 of the value from the electricity that we generate. Whereas the way that we've provisioned it, we're using everything that we generate on site. And so if we take GST off, we're getting about 80%, 87% of the value. And so I guess it's important to highlight that there's a big gulf between those two numbers. So I guess what I'm saying is that if you've got constant load and you're putting solar on your roof, then make sure you've sized it correctly. It's not just a case of putting as many panels on the roof as you possibly can, because you'll only be achieving 1/3 of the value that you potentially otherwise would be for everything that you can consume on site. Hopefully that makes sense. And the numbers do shift quite dramatically in terms of your ROI, your return on investment. It still makes sense, but it's nowhere near as effective. And depending on how deep your pockets are, there's always going to be demands for where else you can invest your capital and where you're going to get your returns, right? So making sure that you make your case as strong as possible, I think is key for these kinds of installs. And I should have mentioned, of course, we're not using any batteries or storage for our solar. Hang on just a second. Welcome, welcome. So we're not using any batteries or storage for the solar. Obviously, we have our UPSs, which is our uninterrupted power supply, and they have batteries. But we're consuming all of the electricity off the roof when we consume it. We're not storing it for a cloudy afternoon or an evening when the sun's not shining. And so, how do we do that? So there's this company in New Zealand called Smart Building Solutions. And what they let you do is take a building with tenants, say a multi-tenanted building, and turn it into your own mini power company. So we actually have the whole building powered off two ICPs, as I mentioned earlier, or meters. And those are building A and B on one ICP and building C on another ICP. And so actually it's worth mentioning, I've got a diagram here. South of that, but north of the check meters for individual tenants is the generator for the building and also the solar. And so we just we just generate the solar and it goes through the check meter, but it doesn't go through our ICP. So we take the balance. And obviously by having the generator alongside with that, it means the whole building is protected and sized so that if there was a power outage on the mains, that the generator would automatically start and it comes off the top. So that's quite a nice way of doing it. It means that we pay obviously a single power provider for the power, and our tenants, of which we are one, pay for what they're consuming, and that's the way that we recoup the difference between the amount that we're generating off the roof and the amount that we're taking from the mains. And obviously we pay the bill, because if we didn't pay the bill, the power would be turned off. And so, yeah, for those who are interested in how this really works, there's a bunch of IoT nerdery going on. Ultimately, the check meters are sending data through to some third-party software. Even we don't get to know exactly what the third-party software is. We just see the metered power coming through in hourly increments. And then ultimately that gets turned into a bill a little bit like this one here. Don't worry, that's not our power bill, that's completely made up. But that gives you an idea of what you would see as a tenant. And so we're not having to do any issuing of invoices or anything else. So if you were in a building, for example, where you had some constant load and you thought, gosh, it'd be nice to put some solar panels on the roof, you can have a chat to your landlord. The solutions exist out of the box out there today, and you can get on and get going with it. So I'm happy to share how it's been going. So we got off to a really good start in 2022, where we did 140,000 kilowatt hours, which was just a little bit shy of that 190,000 mark that Trilect put up on their website in terms of what they were aiming for. But then in 2023, I don't know if anyone remembers what happened in January 2023 in Auckland. It was quite a wet January. And so you can actually see, if you look between, say, the top right in 01 and the bottom left in 01, the difference in the amount of power that we were generating just in that month alone was down about 25%. So yeah, that wasn't a great month for us, and it actually has put a big dent in how much we sort of generated in 2023. We only generated 173,000 kilowatt hours, so about 9,000 kilowatt hours lighter. And yeah, even though, and this is that's one inverter, and that's another inverter there, and you'll see that the difference is even more stark on this one than it is on the other inverter. This one's the 120 kilowatt hour, 120 kilowatt inverter. So yeah, in terms of the ROI, even after we had to spend on the purlin upgrades, it was about 15%. So around a 7-year payback on solar panels that are, they're designed to run for a lot longer than 7 years. So yeah, for us, we think and the numbers that we're seeing so far, we think it makes a lot of sense. If you have that constant draw, these numbers obviously change dramatically if you start exporting because, for example, the amount of value you're getting is around that 32% mark. So yeah, for us, it made a lot of sense. For you, and I guess in a residential setting where you're using batteries as well, it probably would still make sense, but the numbers would shift quite a lot, especially if you're using the batteries to store the electricity for when you come home. For us, we're using power 24/7, and especially in office settings, these days it's actually a little bit different, isn't it? But it used to be said that in an office setting, that people would be in the office using the electricity when the sun was shining. Maybe with a bit more work from home, that's a little bit different today, but certainly you want to make sure that wherever you're doing a solar install, you're consuming that power as close to when it's generated as possible to keep those costs down and keep the return on investment up. Yeah, and that's me. This is just a little plug from us that if you're, like this talk and looking for a job, we're always looking for smart people to join our company. Feel free to email your CV through to employment at SiteHost. We'd love to chat. And with that, I'm done and open for questions.
Yeah, Quintin. That was good. I suggest you guys to post any questions we have in terms of this, but I'll generally start some questions regarding what you have presented to us today.
Sure.
But you mentioned about like in a backup, so like in a backup power grids, like in a UPS and other kind of fail-safe systems to protect in terms of electrical or electrical disaster or something like that.
Yes.
But can you all hear me? Yeah, great. So what would you think, you've been also active for 20 years as well. Like what was a big learning during the Christchurch earthquakes such and how it helped you to think beyond the conventional ways of alternative energy sources, in terms of the Auckland things that you're saying and and also the Christchurch. What was the biggest learning that came out of that?
So what was the question exactly? Sorry. I'm just trying to understand it. So the learning was around how the solar, how from what
So,
kind of energy
what would your fail-safe systems during
ah,
fail-safe system during
okay.
during disasters or things like that? Yeah.
So essentially we treated the design of this as this was part of the mains power grid. Our UPS and fail-safe systems sit completely downstream of this. So they
Mhm.
don't see any of this. It's not integrated at all. The power draw is just the same, and it's just where the electrons flow, right? So
Mhm.
in terms of I guess answering your question around that, probably
Mhm.
the biggest lesson we learned was that making changes to a live DC is actually quite difficult.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so as much as possible, trying to plan for those things up front. But not impossible, and we managed to find a solution for that. In fact, Pete was
Yeah.
the one who put the circuit breakers on the bus bar when we finally came up with how we were going to bring it into production.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, I wouldn't say there's a little bit of complexity in terms of how this needs to work with the generator, but it wasn't
Mhm.
it wasn't a, it wasn't a heap to be honest. And generators in buildings these days, touch wood, are pretty well understood sort of problem. And the guys at Trilect understood sort of how they needed to work with that.
Great. So
Yeah.
you mentioned about the 7-year leeway to getting a return on investment of sorts. What are the kind of ways that you calculated that? and and what are the frameworks that you used to that you used to do that?
So, very, very basic was just looking at, I mean, first of all, we looked at the numbers that we were quoted in terms of what we expected to be getting in terms of kilowatt hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then we didn't adjust them for inflation or any
Yeah.
other things. We just took a straight line. Um, but actually, it's good that you mentioned that because the price of power has increased since we did this install, which is
Mm,
which has shortened that time horizon a little bit as well. So yeah, in effect, you are hedging yourself a little bit in these kind of installs against increased costs, which is obviously something that we're all is very much front of mind these days.
right. And in terms of the other, I think the panels that you're speaking about, what is the life expectancy of it? Like, how many more years can you run based on some sufficient maintenance and other things that you can think of?
Yeah, so I think the panels are run 20 to 25 years. They do lose some
Yeah.
lifetime over them. I mean, I'm not a solar sales guy,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Was
Yeah,
was your decision like different based on when you compare it with the monkey toe and other solar testing things? Was it any different, like the duration or expectancy of the panels?
the panels wouldn't have changed in expectancy there. That was
Expectancy or
just
anything?
a strengthening thing. There was a question I saw around the inverter. The inverter does have a expected lifetime that's shorter. I think the
Yeah.
expected lifetime of an inverter is about 10 years. Um, but there's a fair amount of labor. The inverters are not cheap for sure, but there's a fair
Mhm.
amount of labor involved in getting the panels on the roof in the first place as well. So yeah, there's definitely some factors there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Joan Hope asks if would it make any commercial sense at this scale to use battery storage and more solar panel capacity to cover the dusk to dawn hours instead of using grid power during the night?
Um, I mean, if you have enough, it probably makes sense, but the top line numbers are not going to be anywhere near as impressive. Um, I mean, at 15% ROI, you can afford to go to the bank and say, yeah, we're gonna borrow, and if interest rates go up to 6, 7% or whatever whatever they might be, it's still viable, right? Also not a banker, so talk to your bank about that. But once you start factoring in batteries, storage, and these sorts of things, that's just a lot of increased cost, and the complexity of managing batteries. We are already doing it, of course.
Mhm.
Um, but our UPSs don't store, if we're talking dusk till dawn, that's 12 hours with a battery of runtime. That's
Mhm.
a lot of batteries. Um, you know, I don't know. I don't know about that. I would think it would make a whole lot less sense to do that.
Right.
Just personally. So it depends on your install. If you've got no choice, and
Mhm.
that's what you need to do to get a reliable power service, then that's very different um, to everything else. But if we were taking a purely economic approach,
Mhm.
um, it possibly makes more sense to rely on the mains grid and to use generator when it goes offline. If
Fantastic.
it ever goes well,
Yeah,
and
if yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Cedar, I don't know if I should pronounce it Cedar, but yeah, Cedar Wong asks, did you develop the software subsystem by yourself? What is its position and importance in the whole system?
So the power system is not ours. The
Hmm.
power system is another. I'm not here trying to sell you a power solution.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I'm here talking to you about what we've done to ensure that we're doing as much as possible to source our power sort of efficiently and ethically as possible. So uh,
Hmm.
the power solutions were all off the shelf. We just did a couple of keywords into Google and found them, and put
Hmm.
the solution together by talking to a few people who helped us along the way. Yeah, yeah, and definitely the guys at Trilect are familiar with all of these different pieces that need to go together to make it work.
Fantastic. You mentioned about law, being participating in the Cloud Fest 2024. What was the kind of key takeaways or trends, in terms of the shaping the future of a sustainable cloud hosting and data management from that?
Yeah, yeah, no, Europe, over in Russ, Germany, or Rust, Germany, as they pronounce it.
Hmm.
Um, that was a surreal experience, honestly. So probably the biggest surprise over there is just how big our industry is. So in New
Mm-hmm.
Zealand, I see Lee on the call, but there's only a handful of hosting or cloud providers that are sort of
Mm-hmm.
New Zealand based, and a few multinationals that sort of roll around from country to country. But over there, there's just a lot of much smaller organizations. Data sovereignty is a much bigger topic. For
Mm-hmm.
example, I flew into Zurich, Switzerland,
Mm-hmm.
and it was less than 2 hours to where I was in Germany, and then across the border was obviously France. It's extremely common, like within 2 hours drive, for each of those countries to have their own DCs,
Mm-hmm.
and for those to be sort of independently owned and run. So, for example, I was talking to people from many, many different countries in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd think, like in New Zealand, it would be enough to have ADC in a geographical area.
Mm-hmm.
But for them, some of their requirements are very different. They have very geographically constrained requirements, both government and also just operational. So that was an interesting takeaway. I didn't expect that, honestly. And then probably the last take was just talking to a few data center providers over there, just the swing and hardware vendors, just the swing that's coming back towards hosting your own, running your own tin. Some of the things that some of the things we've been talking about a bit more on our blog as well. Just
Mm-hmm.
probably just backed off a few trends that we're seeing at the moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how was the launch of WebSlice? Because and I want to hear about it. Like, how did you use that as a tool for international markets and international audience? And how was the reception of the launch as well? And yeah.
A lot of really interesting chats. I got back probably about 10 days ago, and we're just kicking off. We're talking about it this morning actually.
Mm-hmm.
Following up on the feedback from some of those chats, soliciting the people who have signed up and asking them for feedback and going from there. For us, this is our first step outside of sort of New Zealand, Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a lot to learn there. We have a saying internally that there's no such thing as an overnight success.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say really, really successful first step for us in getting WebSlice launched, and looking forward to learning those little 1% lessons and really finding a model that resonates you know with
Mm-hmm.
the wider audience globally.
Yeah. And what are your plans for incorporating, multiple technologies to enhance the hosting experience for international customers using WebSlice? Just can you expand more about the serverless functions, containerization, edge computing, other things? How is it gonna fall into this framework?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think our pitch was very much focused on time. Time is something that we as developers don't get any more of.
Mm-hmm.
And we seem to be spending an enormously large amount of it wrangling servers or infrastructure or cloud formation or Ansible or Terraform or whatever you might be using today, or some CI/CD pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just means that you either end up not using those tools and shortcutting to just a single server, or you end up with this massive amount of complexity that just slows everything down.
Mm-hmm.
For us, what we're positioning to do is help make a bunch of those. There's been an enormous amount of movement into terms of how we develop and deploy stuff, deploy infrastructure in the cloud over the last decade and a bit. And for us, it's about enabling your average developer who wants to just
Mm-hmm.
get on and get their idea out the door, to be able to, predominantly for us, we're a LAMP-based shop, but we're also interested in other technologies or other languages as well. But to be able
Mm-hmm.
to like move those LAMP workloads into the cloud, without changing a line of code, and start benefiting from some of those innovations, some of the scaling, and just not having to spend so much time worrying about patching, updating, and everything else that's going on, or everything else that goes into running something 24/7 these days.
Right, right. And like I also want to know about your culture, like, I mean, is some of the things that I'm learning from different startups and different companies as well. Like what is the kind of culture, like, that you invested in culture of continuous learning and skill development at SiteHost that has been a significant part of many of your innovation that is happening there?
Yes.
What would be something that stands out?
I mean, we're extremely, it's cliche, but we're extremely customer orientated. And I would say it's just little things like, for example, Max will post up publicly the feedback, good or bad, that we get for the whole team to see. And so,
Mhm,
sometimes it'll be a customer saying, "Hey, this feature works really well," and so the person who worked on that feature can see the effects of the work that they've done.
mhm,
But it's a lot of little things, honestly. Like every technical person starts and does some time in our support team, and that can vary from a few weeks to a couple of months. So even if you're going through and automating at SiteHost, you get a really good crash course of just what it's like at the coalface. What kind of inquiries or questions we get, or if you say XYZ to a customer, how they're going to respond. And so that permeates all throughout the business in terms of we don't have to have conversations along the lines of that's just not going to fly. Customers aren't going
mhm,
to be interested in that because we know it.
mhm,
And so I'd say those are probably the two main ones.
mhm.
But yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know. There's lots of little things that
there's a
go
lot of things that you can
successful
think of.
successful
And
culture, right?
even Cytos as a kind of a bigger leader of sustainability in the cloud infrastructure here, like, what role do you envision renewable energy sources like solar power in New Zealand, but also like what other countries are leading the charge outside New Zealand?
Well, I don't know a lot about what's happening outside New Zealand, and I've never prepared myself to be a leader
Right.
in this field. But I do know that we have an extremely renewable power grid.
Yep.
And so, with the exception of a couple of power plants that are running for, sort of when the hydro is running a little bit low,
Hmm.
we have an extremely sustainable and renewable power grid, unlike other parts of the world. And so, yeah, that's for what
Yep.
we're doing here in New Zealand, that's incredibly important. I think to most New Zealanders that we see that be promoted and actually that keep going in the right direction. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we see that this amount of power that we're generating off the roof is just topping that up and making sure we're doing a little bit. And it really is in the grand scheme of things, it's a tiny amount of just taking the edge off if it's been a dry period down in the bottom of the South Island, which realistically is where a lot of our power comes from. Um, it's just trying to help ease that off a little bit. That's
Yeah.
that's my sort of mental model that I look at.
Right. And as a New Zealand owned company, how do you guys what are the unique challenges and opportunities of operating in the current scenario in here? What do you think of?
Uh,
You went through or that you're thinking of in terms of the opportunities?
Uh, yeah, there's a number that come to mind. There's always something new.
Yeah.
Like we turned 20 this year. There's always something new.
Mhm.
It doesn't seem to get any. You think you might have opened one door and then there's a new boss behind that door. So yeah, I'd say there's lots of unique challenges. Getting our name out there, having
Mhm.
people be aware that we're here. We're trying to do our little bit, but also I'd say probably now that I think about it, probably the biggest challenge over the last sort of 10 years is that, and we're taking steps to address this, of course, is that it used to be enough that you could be a New Zealand company serving New Zealanders.
Mm.
And I'd say that probably is true for like SaaS providers and everything else, but it used to be enough that you could have a trade me in New Zealand.
Mhm.
And obviously they're the exception, because they've been going for a long time. But um, nowadays, I'd say that a lot of those markets are becoming international by default. And so,
Mhm.
the next step for us to continue to be competitive, to provide the value that our customers are expecting, to give them the service levels and the features that they're after, is for us to be exporting our technology into the world as well.
Yeah. Jeff Brash is asking, do you offer a hosting plan that is 100% renewable?
Drop me an email and we can have a chat about what 100 renewable means. But yeah, yeah.
That's great.
Would be my answer to that. We haven't gone down the route of buying carbon credits. That would have been the easy route.
Mhm.
We're actually generating some power and contributing positively to the power grid.
Mm,
In terms of like in accounting, just swipe through and buy some carbon credits. We could have easily done that and marketed ourselves as being 100% renewable. But if that's we're also very interested in what people are looking for and what they want. So
mm.
drop me an email, sales@sitehost.nz, and I can have a chat with the team and we can come back to you with some options.
Great, Jeff. There you go. And like, and as an advocate of things that you're currently doing, what advice would you give to other data tech companies that are starting out that journey to reduce their environmental footprint and kind of embrace the renewable energy solution? What is the barrier that we can and advice that you can think of?
I think it's really hard, right? Because the example I just gave you of what we did only
Yeah.
worked because we're incredibly vertically integrated. So from the business to the DC to the building, all vertically integrated. Now that's not common. So um, and even then, like when we started this project, not that it was incredibly risky, but there was some risk there. The solar panels could have not worked the way we wanted them to do too. Like the easy route would have been to go to the park and have a coffee. Um,
Hmm.
so in terms of like advice I'd give somebody else. I don't think I'm well placed to give advice on these sort of things, honestly. But like, find whatever's important to you in terms of moving the needle for your business and dial in on it. You know, and for us, this made environmental and financial sense. I'm not sitting here saying you should do this for the right reasons, bar none. I'm also saying I listened to the numbers as well, and it made sense. So that's why on a risk adjusted basis, we thought it was worth a punt. So there may be those opportunities in your business, but I'm not sure what they would be without going through case by case, you know what I mean? And the individuals will know, what the main drivers are for their businesses.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of like site host or websites, what is the next big thing that you're aiming to achieve? Like what would be your biggest next big milestone?
Yeah, so the serverless product, we haven't launched it yet. We just launched our container product. So the next
Yeah,
big
right.
milestone will be that,
Mhm.
getting it out the door. We're pretty close to starting private beta. So if people want to sign up for it, get their email on the email on webslice.com, then we can get in touch when it's time to go. That's probably been the biggest thing for us is just getting that international market going. I describe SiteHost as a business, and obviously WebSlice is a brand within that business. I describe that SiteHost as a business that's 90% New Zealand, 5% Australia, and 5% rest of the world. The reality is that the rest of the world is massive.
Mhm.
So it would be fantastic to start to see those numbers for the rest of the world moving in the right direction. And we've got a long way to go. There's no such thing as an overnight success. So that's what keeps it interesting, and that's what keeps me doing it.
Fantastic. One of the last questions that I have is is you mentioned about football and squash in your profile. Has it influenced your approach to leadership and problem solving within the tech sector or for the last 20 years?
Yeah, probably football has. You really have to think about how you communicate both on and off the pitch. And I'd say that's true in all elements of the workplace as well.
Fantastic. And Jack Pivok asks you, what's your squash grade?
Ungraded Jack, come to Auckland, we'll have a game, mate.
Yeah. Anyway, oh, he says, deal, great. You should write to him. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for your talk and some of the questions I said. So it's been nice to have this kind of thing pop up in Canterbury and Christchurch and to support each other in our journey through Canterbury Tech and also SiteHost to us as well. So thank you for being here and thank you everyone, all the remaining participants there as well. Hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Make sure you reach out, follow some of the links that Max has been posting if you want to learn more about it and talk to them if you have any more questions. And we will look forward to seeing you in the next lunchtime session soon. So make sure you check out all the events in canterburytech.nz in the calendar link. So you will have all the things as such. But thank you so much for everyone who's been part of today's session. I will let you go and we shall end it right now.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Quintin. Cheers.
Bye.